Hello, I'm Dr. Lucy Huggins. I work at the University of Plymouth and I'm a social and cultural historian of 18th century England. I'm particularly interested in marginalised communities and how people managed to get by, how they were able to meet their material needs when they were underemployed or unemployed or unable to work, and what happened to them, how they experienced poverty and the kinds of things that they did to cope with that poverty. So I'm interested in things like crime, theft as part of a way of making shift. And that's really going to be the topic of my talk today. In order to do my research, I use spreadsheets a lot. They are extremely valuable to me. And I use them for a range of things. And I'm going to talk through some of those things today. I'm going to talk through some of the problems, because we all know that they do have them, but how I mitigate some of those problems and how those limitations can actually be a strength for the type of research that I do. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is a, a large sort of corpus of evidence that I use in my research, and that's the proceedings of the Old Bailey. As you know, the Old Bailey is a central criminal court in London, and the proceedings were a transcript of the trials that took place there between 1674 and 1913. So here on the right of the screen is what it looked like. This was a commercial publication. So the court scribe would write them. The Corporation of London would publish them. So these are a publication. They're a commercial endeavour. Now, the Old Bailey Online project is a digital humanities project that digitised all of the proceedings within the chronological range of their existence. So the project enables that I work in the 18th century, as I said. I'm particularly interested in the period today between 1750 and 1799, so that latter half of the century. And the Old Bailey Online project enabled the 28,120 trials which take place within that time frame to be digitally analysed. They have a range of functions on the website. You can do statistical analysis, you can do keyword searching, you can do all sorts of interesting things. And obviously this is a tremendous help for historians that are interested in the kinds of things that these sources can tell us. So within that time frame, there are over 39,000 unique prosecutions or total defendants. And the Old Bailey Corpus, which is another digital humanities project from the University of Helsinki, estimates that there are over 3.5 million words contained in the spoken passages in the 5 decades between 1750 and 1799. Now, for a historian like me, that language is crucial. If I want to understand how people experienced poverty, how they experienced criminality linked to their poverty, I really want to get at what they said. And because these proceedings can contain the words of people's testimonies, of witness statements, and so on and so forth, this is an extraordinary research, extraordinary resource to help me think about the kind of research questions that I'm interested in. Now, they also enable me to blend quantitative, qualitative and linguistic methodologies to hear these voices. These voices can be recorded in the testimony in the Old Bailey proceedings, and by using quantitative, qualitative and linguistic methods, I can extract that plebeian consciousness, which lots of historians will point to as being, something that is quite difficult to get hold of because, with literacy rates, so on and so forth, it's very difficult to get the words of the poor themselves, but the Old Bailey proceedings do have them. Here is just the kind of language that they contain. And these two scholars of historical pragmatics, which is a linguistic discipline, say that they're a valuable source because they give more or less faithful reproductions of actual spoken language. So they contain recorded language, which is taken down during a speech event, but the Old Bailey proceedings also contain reconstructed language, which is dialogue that takes place. Now, there are some problems with the proceedings as a source. They don't contain everything that's said within a trial. Much information is omitted. They're subject to what the court scribe wanted to say. And as they are commercial publications, so the more salacious trials get the most print space. And from my perspective, that's quite a limitation because I'm interested in things like theft, which aren't as perhaps attractive to the reader as some other crimes. The content is shaped by the readership, and of course, there cannot be a full account of crime in London. The dark figure, which is crime that's unprosecuted, unrecorded, is always present. And as well, you know, not all evidence is given in court, and not all crimes are dealt with at the Old Bailey. This is the central criminal courts for felonious offences. And of course, and this is where spreadsheets really do become important, is that they are subject to the vagaries of 18th century parlance and 18th century spelling, which is very scattered and very imprecise. So for me, I want to get at the language. Now you can, oh, actually, here's a, this is an example of some of the language, or what I would call the language of poverty, that you can find in these proceedings. So we have some quotes from trial proceedings here. From 1767, John Bowditch, nothing but the greatest distress could have tempted me to commit the offence that he was accused of. Sarah Newby says that I'm a very poor woman. I have 3 children. I was in liquor. Samuel Rowley, I was in distress. I went to the parish. They would only give me 6pence to get a lodging. And I was greatly distressed. I have 2 poor children. So we can see the language of poverty in these sources, but how can we possibly draw any kind of patterns or trends or real understanding of this without a spreadsheet? So why do they matter? Well, it's not just about collecting that data. It's not just about counting how many people say that they are poor. Because 18th century language is so imprecise, it's so, you know, a dictionary is of little use. Dictionaries in the 18th century record elite parlance. They don't always record common parlance. So compiling a glossary of words to use the tools on the Old Bailey online is an iterative process. The more you read, the more terms you find, the more ways of spelling terms you find. And a spreadsheet is the ideal place to record this. You can start to draw, you know, start to get some numbers out very, very quickly. You can start to see what terms are common, what's being used frequently, or what perhaps is contextually incorrect at that point, even though it's contextually correct for us today. So the very act of data entry helps that process. Now, of course, it is possible to, because the Old Bailey proceedings online have been digitised, of course, it's possible to just text mine, but that doesn't give the vital context that I need. Poor is used in a range of ways. Poor, you know, oh, you poor person, how unfortunate you are. It doesn't always mean material deprivation. So, but only through reading and then being able to record instances of this as a contextually correct usage can we really get to understanding just how many people describe themselves as poor, for example. Distress, similarly, distress has several meanings in the 18th century. I could talk about this for 20 minutes, but I'm not going to, so I do need to talk about some other things. So I'm interested in perceptions as well. So it isn't just about people saying that, you know, they stole something because they were poor. I'm interested in what other people in the courtroom say about them. What do witnesses say? What do prosecutors say? And in order for me to understand that, I need to be able to record who is saying what. And a spreadsheet allows me to do that. And then a spreadsheet allows me to analyse who says what about who very quickly. So these patterns and trends really, really matter. And spreadsheets enable me to record all this data and then to analyse it, and to analyse it without having any particular skills beyond Excel or Google Sheets or whichever program you're using. It enables me to note down all sorts of things that I find interesting that I might want to come back to later. So it's a really iterative process, and spreadsheets aid that iterative process tremendously. And by using them, I can blend quantitative and qualitative methodologies in a way that just text mining would never enable me to do. I would not be able to do that qualitative research that I want to do in order to understand experiences if I was just text mining and then counting those word instances. And this also spreadsheets provide really quick and easy ways to play with the data. It prompts new research questions. I can start to read through trials, note stuff down that interests me, and suddenly I'm seeing several of the same thing. What does this mean? what can I do with, what can this tell us about lives at this time? So this is just an example. This is just an example. This is a table. Obviously, it's not a spreadsheet. This is a table taken from returns on a spreadsheet. This is looking at the 28,000 odd trials recorded in the proceedings in the latter half of the 18th century. And it shows how many hits were returned if I just did keyword searching. So this is on the first column. Just doing the keyword searching and taking the statistics from the site gives us the first column. When I can qualitatively read those trials, read that information, and make sure that the context is correct to be entered into my data set, this shows the difference. So, for example, here we've got poor as a really, really good example. 1,296 instances of poor, only 304 of them were contextually correct. And so text mining and just logging those numbers would never have revealed that. We need that qualitative contextualization too. And as I said previously, I'm interested in who's saying what and the context in which they're saying it. So in this table, it shows that by qualitatively reading the trials, inputting that data into a spreadsheet, I'm able to categorize who says what to who. What does the prosecution witness do? What does the defence witness do? In what context do they say it? Is it as defence? Is it said during the crime? Is it said when they're apprehended? Or is it just given as general information about their lives? And this is all very, very important when trying to build a picture of experience, trying to build a picture of how people cope with poverty in their day-to-day life, particularly or how people coped with poverty by either committing crimes or perhaps being accused of crimes because they were poor. So this is part of that understanding that experience. And without spreadsheets, I'm not able to draw these patterns. I'm not able to do this quantitative research on these qualitative readings of the sources. So 3% of Old Bailey defendants describe themselves as poor. By being able to use a spreadsheet to quantify all this, we can find that. So this is an answer to quite a big question, but it's not the only question. By using a spreadsheet as an iterative tool to collect more data, we can add more information as we go as well. And it's easy to go back to and add more people or add more columns to the information about a person. And it's particularly important for record linkage. So I can have, I've got somebody in the Old Bailey, but I've also got them in a parish record, and everything is there in one place, and it's invaluable to me. You can also, when you're qualitatively reading the trial proceedings and inputting that data quantitatively into a spreadsheet, you can start to see other things. Perhaps people are describing how they are poor. Are they unemployed? Are they disabled and unable to work? Are they widowed? So we can see all of these things, and we can start to add more data. We can start to then draw more patterns out of that data too. So doing that, finding the characterizations of how people characterize poverty results in a further population of defendants, which means we have, this is just our example I'm using today, so I'm going to think about 2,350 defendants, which are then described as poor or described as such by others, or who then share the characteristics of poverty, such as underemployment, unemployment, so on and so forth. We can also think about the circumstances of the theft. Where are they stealing from? What are they stealing? Are these high value items or low value items? Where are they being stolen from? And these prompt really interesting research questions. And we can also see what they do with these items afterwards. And this is my most recent article, and this is an output that's purely based on spreadsheet work. So of those 2,350 defendants that were accused of property crimes and characterised as poor, a quarter of them stood accused of pawning or attempted to pawn stolen goods. And this is an extraordinary finding that, we know that people pawn things. We assume the link to criminality, but we've not been able to drill down into those numbers. A spreadsheet made of quantitative data through a spreadsheet drawn from qualitative reading of the evidence enables us to do that. And we can see some of the extent of this relationship. So, this is really, really important. And so this is just an example of a research output from this kind of methodology. And there are other general benefits too. It's really easy to share research, which certainly people have shared their data sets with me that have been on spreadsheets, and it's really enriched my scholarship. I've been able to share my data sets with other people, and it's enriched their scholarship. It's, you don't need any special language or special skills or special training to work with spreadsheets. And it's easy to collaborate. You can share spreadsheets. You can, people can be working together on research questions. It's really easy to visualize data. It's easy to graph, to do pie charts, to do whatever. We can do all of these things. It's cheap or comparatively cheap, or even free, depending on things like institutional access, or if you're using Google Sheets, for example. And it's really easy to learn how to use. There's so much information out there for free that teaches you how to use it. You don't have to look particularly hard to find that. And we're all time poor. And we're all, got a million things to do. Learning yet another program, another piece of software is sometimes a bit of an ask. But this, spreadsheets allow us to do all of these things without having that special training, that special skills, that special knowledge. But there are, of course, limitations. Data entry, but this is, whatever kind of database. I know spreadsheets aren't necessarily a database, but whatever database you're using, data is only as good as the person who enters it. So you, of course, have to be careful. And then when mistakes are made, they're really hard to spot. Of course, it is Excel, and we know some of the problems that Excel has in general. It's not always as powerful as we might want something to be. But for my purposes, it pretty much is. It very much does the job. But some of these limitations can actually be a strength. Knowing that it's easy to make mistakes on data entry makes you more careful. It makes you double, triple check your data. And when you're doing that, you're thinking about it all the time, and you're asking yourself new questions, you're sparking new ideas, you're spotting things that you might not spot even just by filtering or graphing. Just that act of going through it again is really, really useful. So the limitations of data entry more generally can be a problem, but they can also be a strength. So to conclude, using spreadsheets to blend quantitative and qualitative methodologies to answer large research questions is really important. It's a fundamental part of my scholarship. It's a fundamental part of the way I work. And I don't think I'd be able to address the kinds of research questions that I'm interested in without them. They offer the opportunity to build data sets which are contextually correct. Text mining rarely can do that because a machine cannot provide the context that you need it to do. Even if you set parameters that have a sentence around or a sentence behind, you're not saving yourself much. You're still having to read it. You're still having to go through it, and you get so much more by reading sources as a whole rather than picking bits out that a machine thinks you want. So it's really important way to get hands on, to get your hands dirty with the evidence. It's really important. So they're invaluable to me, and they're invaluable for lots of other historians. Whilst they do have limitations, those limitations can be overcome, and indeed recognising them and addressing them can really strengthen the research and can lead to more quality research. And of course, and I think this is really important, they do offer the opportunity to share and collaborate with other scholars, as we don't need any special skills or special programs or compatible programs, compatible machines, or any special language to understand them and to work with them. Thank you very much for listening. And if you've got any questions, my email is lucy.huggins@plymouth.ac.uk, or questions can be asked on Slido, or you can find me on Twitter @Lucy_Huggins. Thanks ever so much. Goodbye.